Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Gameweek 28 cheat sheet. Just a quick prefacing note, I am recording this video after the lineups have come out for Everton versus Man United. I don't know the results of the game, I do know the lineups, and I've taken some of those changes and impacts into account. Whether or not something crazy happens with that game, unfortunately this won't be taken into account of, but I think just on sort of my general feel of things, I don't think it has a massive impact on the cheat sheet. So let's just get started. If you've never seen the cheat sheet series before, it's effectively a tier list for FPL, looking at the short-term fixture run, taking into account, I think, the wider picture that, okay, some people have wildcarded and maybe even are wildcarding now, but the general consensus, I think, is probably a wildcard 32. And so keeping with that in mind, it's a little bit more short-term focused, right? So we're not looking at the traditional 5-day game weeks at a time. I think it's going to be a little bit more narrow. Plus, of course, the information around double gaming 33 and a potential double gaming 36 has not really crystallized. So there's no real need to kind of think too deeply about that in the future. Although I think if you are planning ahead, you do want to kind of vaguely have an understanding of what potential double gaming 33 games we can get if you're thinking a little bit longer term. But I think for most people, that's probably not a significant impact. But let's get started. So in the midfield position, I think what you'll notice, of course, is there's a lot of good players in the midfield position, and I think a lot of players to choose from. And some people, of course, are looking at the midfielders and almost thinking that it's very tough to say that some of the players who are more open play threats, who are, let's say, below that, I think, premium tier of maybe like an Mbomo or a Semenyo, or even a Wirtz, for example, are any better than, for example, some of the 5 million midfielders. And I totally understand that sentiment, right? You're seeing players get DEFCON almost week to week to week. And it's very hard to sort of replicate that unless you yourself are getting DEFCON as a midfielder or you're producing very consistent attacking returns. And I totally get that. But I still think we have some players within the midfield who still have the potential to get those attacking returns. And that's why I still think there's value there. But there's nothing stopping people in FPL right now from just simply having a lot of good DEFCON midfielders and maybe spending their money elsewhere, because that's where you get the likes of the Virgils in the world or the Nico O'Reillys. But I think the game just shows you that, budget is not that impactful this season. So in the midfield position, I think Douglas Luiz is still top for me. He's not really done too much as of late, but I think the DEFCON numbers are enticing. He still is not getting subbed off as early as, in previous games. He's more of like an 85-minute player right now, and I think that's perfectly fine for a player on paper who could still take penalties when maybe Abraham's off the pitch, although that might, come to an end soon, and also is on a couple set pieces. So I still think Douglas Luiz is not too far from the rest of the players that we've mentioned as very serious DEFCON getters. Stack has also been added back into the cheat sheet. This is a player, also an 85-minute player, who has things like set pieces, and there's a lot of intangibles to that, as we can see with the Stack free kick goal versus Aston Villa. So he's been added back now that he's fit and he's available. Lefebvre I've also added back. This could be wrong, and I think Diarra has already taken a penalty and successfully converted recently. So Lefebvre scoring a penalty versus Fulham, I don't think really changes the needle on things, other than to suggest that I think he still has reasonably good penalty share. And I think something that I wasn't baking in so much when I dropped Lefebvre 2 tiers last week was how early Diarra can get subbed off within certain games. So I think that was one of his more early Premier League substitutions, especially after AFCON. So I think just to give a little bit more respect to Lefebvre, who I actually ended up playing this week, by the way, I think he deserves just to rise back to yellow, where I think he's just a solid pick. In the next tier, I think you have a lot of top-tier options. Both Dewsbury Hall and Anderson, even amidst of tougher fixtures, still have an amazing Burnley at home fixture. And these are players who are still very consistent, right? So I think the beauty of Anderson, Garner, Dewsbury Hall is that as a midfielder in certain game states, when let's say you're versus a very tough opponent, I think the fact that you can sort of resort to getting DEFCON and maybe even outscoring some of the better midfielders in the game just shows you how valuable this is. It's not really even a slow creep, right? Someone like Anderson, I think, has gotten maybe 10 games straight of DEFCON, and that's extremely impressive. Like over that time, I don't think you would have found many midfielders to have outscored him just on the DEFCON points alone. So someone who's that consistent at it alongside Garner is just inevitably a very good pick in FPL. With Tavernier, I've added him because it seems like he's back now. I kind of thought he would be coming back a little bit later. He only played, I think, 11 minutes and, of course, a little bit of added time versus West Ham. And to me, that's not good enough to indicate, especially with the circumstances of the next 2 game weeks. Something to think about is always fixture scheduling and how do players deal with midweek fixtures. There are some players who I think inevitably are a little bit more fit than others, who are more susceptible to playing 2 games in a row versus a Tavernier who's coming off of a hamstring injury, recovering from it, only played fewer minutes than some of the other substitutions within that match versus West Ham, like a Brooks, who came on a bit earlier. And I just don't see how Tavernier has great minutes over 28 and 29, which are 2 absolutely amazing fixtures for Bournemouth. Sure, you might still get Burnley away, but I don't really see him as a buy this week because it could be the case that he starts Sunderland and then actually has reduced minutes versus Brentford, or it's vice versa. So it's very hard to make that call. And I just think that regardless of whether he starts or not, he's going to have poor minutes on the other game. So I just think he's still probably someone that you skirt past up until maybe game week 30. As far as game weeks 28 and 29, I think that's also an impact on Adley. So we saw what 2 sort of closely congested Bournemouth fixtures could do to Adley's minutes. I probably could put my hands up and just say I overstepped the mark a little bit with having Adley as a green pick. I think I'll retract on that a little bit because that's something to think about in the future is if Tavernier is going to get more minutes, where is he going to get those minutes, especially if Ryan, I still think, looks like the most nailed player on that side, where it seems like Irola is comfortable with the sort of effort that Ryan puts on the pitch, which allows him to stay on for more players. And therefore, you're kind of looking at a picture for this Bournemouth attack where all the substitutions might drop outside of Ryan, with exception to, let's say, exceptional circumstances where, maybe he's coming off as well. Like, for example, he could play maybe 90 and then 17 a game, but that's good enough, I think, over 2 fixtures, especially since most of the competing picks in this price tier who actually have really good underlying stats will also probably have the same sort of minutes concerns. And I think Dango is a very good example of that. So with that as a picture, I think with the amount of depth that Bournemouth have, I do think Adley has to drop. With Wilson, I think I gave him a rise last week. I feel very comfortable about that. I feel very happy to have done so before another Hull versus Sunderland. I just think with the amount of injuries that this Fulham team has, with the potential minutes that just gives Wilson over 3 out of 4 amazing fixtures going forwards, he just seems like an exceptional pick, a little bit of a no-brainer. There's a lot of midfielders to choose from, as I said, so you don't necessarily need to go for Wilson, but I think he is actually at the top of my mind when it comes to midfield transfers this week, alongside Dango. And I think a lot of people are equally enticed by Ryan as well. I think there's probably a little bit less to go off of Ryan, other than if you've watched him play, he just looks like a monster. Not too dissimilar to, for example, when you see, for example, Esteban on the pitch, like he can still do absolutely miraculous things. And I think Ryan looks almost physically potentially a step ahead. I mean, that run versus West Ham was great, but still, I think we just need to almost look at Wilson and Dango as probably more proven picks. And you could disagree. And Dango, for example, he's got a history of missing pretty big chances. If you look at his career, he's actually quite a negative finisher. On the flip side, Harry Wilson is one of the most positive finishers in the Premier League that we have. So Ryan is most likely going to fall in the camp of a positive finisher, as he has been within his young career. But I still think that 2 of the other options are a bit more trusted. But I don't think you can really be faulted for going for anyone. That's your preference. Casemiro and Somerville, I still hesitate to drop them because I still think Somerville is putting on some really good performances. So even in the previous match versus Bournemouth, he was still the player with some of the best chances in that game. West Ham accumulated something like 3xG. I think West Ham are comfortably actually sort of proving themselves as a team now going forwards, and their underlyings are very, very respectable, even though they are, at the league position that they're at. So I still like Somerville as a pick. Yes, the fixtures are very tough. But I almost think it's not too crazy to suggest that you might want to hold him if you're an owner. In the next few tiers, I still got NJ, who has a Burnley at home fixture, still a penalty taker, which obviously has those intangibles. Sobo, yes, at times is sort of operating right back-ish. I think you can see him sort of interrelating roles with the Curtis Jones as well, if you look at, let's say, the previous match. But as I've said, I think he's still a very solid pick, and this is a very good Liverpool run where if you're seeing things like, for example, Salah's coming off the pitch a little bit earlier, that could mean Sobo could be on penalties for 10, 20 minutes at a time. At the same time, of course, the set piece accuracy has been amazing this season, so that's still taken into account. And I think someone who's also a benefactor at times of getting DEFCON. Sade has been added back into the cheat sheet. I didn't add him last week because I was actually pretty sure that KLP or Lewis Potter would actually play. Lewis Potter didn't have the best of games, neither did Brentford as a whole, and I think that's why you saw Sade come on the pitch quite early. I still think that his minutes right now, in terms of that triangle between Sade, KLP, and Dango, is almost in a hierarchy of who's performing best. And Dango has a lot of money in the bank. KLP has some good performances, but then I think Sade has the history up until, I guess, if you think about it, he didn't do much after the hat trick, and then of course got a red card. So maybe he's third in this pecking order, but I still think he's quite likely to start the next match. And of course, if he can have a good game versus Burnley, I think he can easily build on that. Plus, he has really, really good underlying stats. So when you kind of compare someone like Sade to a Dango, he still has really, really impressive numbers. And I think that can't be scoffed at, right? This is a player who most likely is going to have better fixtures and better minutes than some of the other players that have actually dropped in terms of Barnes and Sarr. So with Barnes, I think his minutes are definitely impacted now. So that's pretty evident. As far as Sarr, just a really tough fixture run outside of Leeds at home. And to be honest, I think we give a lot of respect to Leeds for a really good reason. They're just a very top team. And even looking back at the Crystal Palace game, I just wasn't really convinced with them when they were actually playing 11 versus 11 versus Wolves. So there's not much to be said in terms of like the valuation of Sarr. I just think he is now finally really hurt by the team strength just looking abysmal. In the next few tiers, I've given Gordon a rise. I think this is a player who's now getting more minutes as centre forward, which I think just bolsters his valuation as a general pick. And yes, whilst some of the fixtures are good and some of the fixtures are tough, like for example, Chelsea away and Gameweek 30, overall, Gordon has a pretty smooth run. The only problem is going to be the amount of Champions League minutes that he'll have to play. Given that they're going to advance to Karabakh, sure, he'll get rested for Everton at home. But I think it's also about thinking between the fixtures of Gameweek 29, 30, and 31, how impactful could that be for someone like Gordon for a Newcastle team that's likely to advance in the Champions League and then also put their best foot forward over the next set of games? So I think that's a small impact in terms of his minutes. You're never going to see some sort of crazy ceiling there because they still have a fair bit of depth now available to them on the wide spots and also in the center forward position. But yeah, generally I think he deserves a rise because of a mixture of the Bruno injury still meaning that he's on pens, which I think he always was the default penalty taker anyways, but there's that, and just, yeah, the additional center forward share. As far as the next tier, we've given Wirtz a tiny drop. I think, yes, of course, the quotes on his back injury are promising from Slot, but I think to contextualize it, it still precluded him from the match versus Nottingham Forest. And sure, Slot says he's available next week, but next week is also almost 3 fixtures in a row if you include FA Cup, and I'm not sure if his minutes are going to be absolutely perfect in terms of the way that 28 and 29 is going to fall. I think maybe you could see a picture where he plays perfect minutes versus West Ham, maybe less minutes versus Wolves, and then gets a rest, or vice versa. I just can't really see, and I could be wrong, right? Maybe you kind of think about this back injury and you think it's not really some sort of contact injury. Maybe he's totally fine to play 28 and 29. I just think I'd practice a little bit of caution over the transfer, especially when there are so many other good available picks who don't have, let's say, an injury cloud or doubt over them. And in that sort of final tier, I've still got Palmer and Salah as yellow tier picks. I think if I was being extremely harsh, I think maybe they would even stretch towards being, well, at least Palmer may be an orange pick. I think Salah, just because the fixtures alone, is probably deserving of being a yellow pick, but we're starting to see less minutes for Salah, which I think will rear its head a couple times going forwards, right? So with the Champions League coming in, it's very unlikely that Salah is going to have perfect minutes just on the Premier League, unless, of course, Slot's going to not play in the Champions League, which I find it hard to believe. But I think if he can put out a poor performance like he did versus Nottingham Forest and still get subbed off in a match where Wirtz is not even sort of part of the attacking hierarchy, then of course you can see potential future substitutions later down the line if he's continuing to not play well, or even no starts. So I think you could be harsh to Salah and maybe say he's an orange tier pick, where once again, a lot of people are considering that idea of, do you do the Haaland to Salah hokey cokey before the wild card? And a lot of people have closed off that idea after the Nottingham Forest game. And I think that is still a just reaction. With Palmer, I think the concern is not really over the substitution, because it was, I think, quite a specific game state regarding the 10 versus 11, but more so that the fixture run for Chelsea is very, very poor. So he probably deserves to be an orange pick. Still like the fact that he's actually building on his fitness. I still like the fact that he is the penalty taker of still a very good offense. And that's pretty much it. And he's Cole Palmer. So in the next tier, in the forward position, I've given Mane a pretty significant drop. We've got a blank Gameweek 31 coming up, and I still think the underlying numbers are pretty poor Krupi Jr. actually dropping 90 minutes actually gave me a little bit more renewed confidence in him and his future minutes going forwards. I don't think it's as simple as Tavernier is going to come into this team and suddenly take all the Krupi Jr. minutes away. Listening to some of the Irola press conferences as well, I think you get the feeling that Krupi Jr. might still get a couple of benchings along the way. It's not like he is being thrown in there to sort of get perfect minutes all the time. Someone like Ryan, who's of a similar age, has clearly stepped into a role where he's getting more minutes, but I think, everyone sort of has their kind of path-ish, and the role that Krupi Jr. has to play almost as a second striker within this team is a little bit different to Ryan. So just a bit of context there, but I still think he's a very solid pick. Calvert-Lewin is still a wonderful pick, but I think the fixtures are quite tough for Leeds going forwards. Some of the underlying numbers have also dipped a little bit, but I still think he's a wonderful asset. Barry, not too many updated thoughts on in terms of Evan Nilsson and Raul. I still think they deserve to be in that yellow tier. It could be, yes, of course, Evan Nilsson's had a really, really poor run of games, but I think you could probably, I guess, assign similar-ish logic to Raul, who now is obviously struggling with the Muniz coming back piece. And I think that's going to be a bit of a dampener towards when you look at coming off a great haul versus Sunderland. Is it likely that Raul is going to have perfect minutes over this run? I don't think so with Muniz being around. So I think that is unfortunate for him. And I think the offset of that actually is that Harry Wilson does stand to benefit potentially as being the second penalty taker of that team. Maybe, of course, behind Lukic, who's still out. Strand Larson, I think, just gets a drop. This is just Crystal Palace fixture run related. Bowen also dropped fixture run related as well, but he's actually getting DEFCON in certain matches. I still think at his price point, he's not exactly one of my favorite picks. I think the fixture run is a bit too poor. He's also not as cheap as someone like Somerville, and arguably even has, in recent games at least, worse underlying stats than Somerville. So it's just something to think about over there. And of course, he's, outside of Mane, one of the worst center forwards here when it comes to underlying stats, and of course, Strand Larson as well in a new environment. Watkins, I think, also gets a drop. I do think Abraham's going to come around a little bit more. I still really like João Pedro. I've still kept him as a green pick. I just think some of the recent underlying numbers have been really impressive under Rossinier. Maybe people don't want to keep him, and maybe he should be a yellow tier pick just on fixtures alone. But I have been really impressed by him. And unfortunately, of course, we just don't have many forwards who do impress us. Thiago's still a green, of course, because of an amazing fixture run. And Haaland is still probably the best premium in the game, as dismaying as he might be because of the lack of sort of super hauls that we've seen as of late. In the defensive positions, we have not too many changes. I've added Ayer because I think that Collins has kind of exiled himself from the team as long as Coyote is going to come back in the squad. I just think Ayer and Vandenberg are most likely to keep their spots, at least within the short term, which means that both Vandenberg gets a rise and Ayer, gets introduced in the cheat sheet. Richards gets a drop. That's Crystal Palace fixture run related. There's a Lisandro Martinez injury, which means that Maguire's basically nailed for this run. And I think it's a really good pick, as United still have some pretty good fixtures coming up. And generally speaking, their defense has been really good. Now, I could be recording this video and you could be watching this in the morning saying what a stupid idiot this guy is because Everton scored a ton of goals. But I think that's just my general consensus from looking at the underlying stats under Carrick. And honestly, as a wider aspect of this, I mean, just their general performance over the course of the season when you look at XGC. Mukiele gets a soft drop because of the potential injury situation. I'm not exactly sure the extent of it. I haven't read too many quotes about it, but hopefully he's fine. I do think that, as I said and mentioned last week, the fixtures are still quite tough for Mukiele going forward. So it's not a bad time, for example, to consider just selling one of your Sunderland picks in defense. O'Reilly gets another rise this week. I brought him back to the cheat sheet last week, and I felt pretty comfortable about him being there. But, positionally right now, he is sort of just an absolute monster. I think some of the positions you're seeing him take up almost as that second striker are a bit ridiculous. His positions, I think, week on week have sort of consistently improved in terms of, there were some games where he was sort of playing the lone six in place of Rodri, and then suddenly he kind of just completely deposed Reinders and Foden just like that. And he's basically a box-crashing 90-minute player for Man City playing as a defender. And they still have some really good defensive numbers. So, yeah, O'Reilly deserves a rise here. I think he's a very luxury transfer for a lot of people because he does blank, or most likely is going to blank in Game 31. That's not completely concretized, but yeah, just an exceptional pick. With Guehi, I think he does get a drop, though, because you don't get all the pros of O'Reilly, and at that point, you're sort of relying on a defense. Plus, of course, it's not worth the luxury transfer piece, so I think that's why he falls. Chalobah falls due to Chelsea's fixture run. Gabriel falls and Timber falls as well, mostly just due to Arsenal's fixture run. I don't actually think I have a lack of confidence in Timber's minutes going forwards, especially since it seems like White, unfortunately, again, has succumbed to another injury. But I think the overreaction to, let's say, his minutes with this early substitution for Tottenham is a bit overplayed. I myself will be keeping Timber. I totally recognize that Virgil might be the better transfer. I just don't really have the luxury for that transfer, I would say. Sure, of course, the Liverpool fixtures just look that much better, but Arsenal's defense is also that much better. And I think Timber still shows that he's got good value within the game. I think the Mosquera substitution was quite tactical. I've, of course, still sort of downgraded Timber because of the fixture run, and I think just taking into account that other people might be in better positions than myself to make defensive transfers. But I don't think it's a bad idea to keep Timber in a lot of people's positions. As far as the goalkeeping tier, I don't think there's too many changes. Chelsea fixture run, Crystal Palace potential blank, and fixture run getting worse is the only real impacts that we've taken into account here. Otherwise, I'm pretty happy with the goalkeepers as they stand. Nice to see Verbruggen getting some points as of late. And that's pretty much it for the cheat sheet. So thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate all the support that you guys have shown. If you are enjoying the content and the cheat sheet videos and you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. Less than 50% of viewers are subscribed, and it would be awesome to get to 50K by the end of the season. So thank you guys so much once again.